Quebec, every person who is a qualified elector has the right to vote. To vote, a person must be entered on the list of electors, have attained 18 years of age, be a Canadian citizen, and have been domiciled in Quebec for 6 months. Your role is important to ensure that each elector has a positive experience when voting. If you're responsible for receiving electors, you're the first person they'll meet upon arriving. You're thus well placed to see to it that they feel welcome and that they know exactly where to go. While most electors will not require assistance, this video contains information on how to assist people with a disability, as well as those who might need more time or additional assistance. This is notably the case of electors whose mobility is reduced, seniors, people who are deaf, hearing impaired or visually impaired, as well as those with an intellectual impairment. These electors have the same rights as all other electors. This document highlights the specific actions that you can take to ensure that the experience that these electors have is a positive one. Before polling stations open, make sure that the entrances and exits are accessible and well identified. If your polling place is wheelchair accessible, place an accessibility sign at the height of the eyes of people in a wheelchair. Make sure that there is sufficient space between the various tables of the polling place to allow a person in a wheelchair to move about freely. Keep in mind these few simple rules when serving an elector who requires assistance. The first thing you should remember is that you don't need to be an expert to assist each person who appears before you. The elector knows his needs better than anyone else. After introducing himself, the Primo first informs the elector that he will need to have in his possession an identification document to identify himself at the polling table. The Primo takes advantage of this opportunity to ask the elector if he knows his polling station number and to offer him assistance if necessary. Address the elector and ask him if he'd like to receive assistance. Listen attentively to what he says and act accordingly. Even if another person is accompanying the elector who requires assistance, talk directly to the elector. Some people may have difficulty hearing, so make sure that you have eye contact before speaking and look at the person when you address him. Electors who have difficulty moving about may use various mobility aids, such as a cane or a wheelchair. Don't touch these aids without permission. Consider them part of the elector's personal space. Electors who have difficulties may come to the polling station with a service dog. Don't distract the dog by talking to it or petting it. It's not always easy to know if an elector requires assistance. Some people have difficulties that are not readily visible. Use your intuition in this case. If someone seems confused, approach him and offer him your assistance. Remember to listen to his request carefully and to do what he asks of you. Now, let's review the general rules. Electors know best how they can be assisted. Simply ask them. When you ask them how you can be of assistance, make sure that you establish eye contact and talk directly to the elector.
Bonjour, monsieur.
Don't touch an elector's cane, his wheelchair, or his walker without his permission, and refrain from interacting with a service dog or a guide dog. And when you feel that someone is confused or worried, ask him how you can be of assistance to him. An elector with a visual impairment may require assistance. First, the Primo or the Assistant Primo is invited to welcome the elector by asking him how he would like to be assisted. If the elector requests it, offer him your arm to guide him towards his polling station and explain to him the steps that should be followed. Ask him to keep an identification document readily accessible, which he can show to the deputy returning officer when the time comes. Once you've arrived at the polling station with the elector, the deputy returning officer will ask him his name and address and will check the elector's designation by making sure that it is identical to that entered on the list of electors. If such is not the case, reassure the elector by telling him that the Election Act contains a provision enabling him to vote nevertheless. Then, ask the elector to take the oath. The poll clerk will make mention of the oath in the poll book. The deputy returning officer will then explain to the elector how to use the tools designed to help him vote on his own. A template is available and may be useful for a person with a visual impairment. Ask the elector if he wishes to use it or if he prefers that someone mark the ballot paper according to his instructions. If the elector expresses the desire to use the template, insert the ballot paper in the adapted template that will keep the ballot paper stable and that will allow the elector to vote on his own. Assist the elector by making sure that he has all the necessary information to use the template. For example, inform him that he can run his fingers along the right edge of the template to feel the holes. The places on the ballot paper that can be marked correspond to the holes in the template. You will thus be able to say the numbers corresponding to the candidates on the ballot paper. When you know what hole the elector wishes to mark, he'll be able to make a mark in the appropriate circle using the pencil only once he's in the polling booth. Ask him to refold the ballot paper after having voted by using as a guide the existing folds and by starting from the bottom of the ballot paper. To assist him in this task, tell him that the bottom of the ballot paper is the side with no holes. You can ask him to perform the operation in front of you if he so wishes. Reassure him by saying that in the event of an error, he can always obtain a new ballot paper. Once the ballot paper has been suitably placed in the template, guide the elector to the polling booth and then wait for him. When the elector has finished marking his ballot paper and leaves the polling booth, retrieve the template while making sure that the elector has kept his ballot paper with him, and then lead him to his polling station. The elector will give his folded ballot paper to the deputy returning officer, who will detach the stub and will give the ballot paper back to the elector. The deputy returning officer always informs the elector of the fact that he can obtain a new ballot paper if he makes a mistake. And this is true for all electors. The deputy returning officer is trained to dispose of the marked or spoiled ballot papers. Some electors may have a partial visual impairment. The poster containing the photos of the candidates and that reproduces the ballot paper is placed on the wall at the entrance to the polling place. You can use the poster to show electors the order of the candidates on the ballot paper. Depending on the degree of visual impairment, electors can choose to use the template to mark their ballot paper, or they may be able to do so themselves if they know the order of the candidates. Now, let's re-examine the tools that help facilitate the exercise of the right to vote for people with a visual impairment. The template allows people who are blind or who have a visual impairment to mark on their own and in secret the ballot paper by selecting the candidate of their choice. And the poster with the photos of the candidates allows people with a partial visual impairment to identify the order of the candidates on the ballot paper. They can then decide whether or not to use the template depending on the degree of their impairment. Electors with a hearing impairment need to see your face and your mouth when you speak. Make sure that you establish eye contact before beginning to speak and continue to look at the elector while you speak to him. When you direct an elector who is deaf or has trouble hearing, You can make signs or point with your finger. You may also find a notepad and a pencil useful to communicate with these electors. The deputy returning officer can allow the elector with a hearing impairment to be assisted by a person capable of interpreting the sign language of the deaf. Some electors may choose not to mark their ballot paper. They may prefer that a spouse or a relative who accompanies them or the deputy returning officer in the presence of the poll clerk mark the ballot paper for them. Another person in the presence of the deputy returning officer and the poll clerk can also offer this assistance. This person shall state under oath that he has not already provided assistance during the poll to another elector who is not his spouse or a relative. If someone expresses concern about marking his ballot paper, you can inform him that he can obtain assistance. The deputy returning officer and the poll clerk are trained to meet the needs of these electors. Your role as primo or deputy returning officer is to interact directly with the elector, the most important stakeholder in elections. The electors that you'll meet are as varied as the people you encounter in your community on a day-to-day basis. The Chief Electoral Officer hopes that the content of this video will give you confidence in your ability to assist all electors, including people with an impairment and those who need more time. We ask that you always bear in mind that all people who are qualified electors have the right to vote. Your work simply consists of doing what you can to help them have a positive experience. Of course, most electors will require very little, if any, assistance. You'll have to rely on your intuition if you believe that someone needs assistance, and bear in mind that you don't need to know exactly what type of assistance each elector requires. You simply need to ask, "How can I best assist you?"